Hi, I'm Davis.
And I'm Andy.
Welcome to another episode of Game Grazers Discuss. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Davis.
How are you?
Oh, it's just a wonderful day in the neighborhood. How about for you?
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
I miss Fred Rogers.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so today's question actually comes from a really good personal friend of ours, Nathan Brunetti. We miss you, bud. You know, you off getting your education in Canada.
Eating Tim Hortons, eh?
And poutine. I got a question topic for the Discuss segment. What are some games you think, in terms of graphics, have aged and... Well, this is poorly written, Nathan. What are some games you think, in terms of graphics, have aged well and ones that didn't age so well? Why do you think some age well and some don't? Any guesses on current-ish games you think will hold up as they age?
Well, we could certainly say that some people age better than others. Some game publishers age better than others. Capcom. Konami. Anyway, sorry.
Anyway.
Let's reel this back in.
Woo! So, I can always think of tons of examples of games I think have graphically aged poorly and others that have aged greatly. Kind of my go-to of two games that I feel have not aged well graphically, and I'm sure I'm about to get an assload of shit for this, are Ocarina of Time and Final Fantasy VII. But on the flip side, I think a game that has aged pretty well is Super Mario 64, actually. And I think a lot of it has to do with understanding what the limitations of your system are and how you can get the best performance out of that system through aesthetic. I think there's a huge difference between, aesthetic and graphics. And I think if you nail your aesthetic, you can have a game that, even though it could be generations old, just seems to get better with age. Like Wind Waker. Which in my opinion is probably one of the most beautiful games ever made. Andy?
Grim Fandango.
Does not look good.
Didn't age so well.
No,
I think that in general, so in my mind, like when we were in the 2D sprites world, I thought there was tons of like beautiful sprite-based games. Like I feel like, some of the pre-Final Fantasy VII, later Final Fantasies.
Yeah.
I think I would argue that the graphics for Final Fantasy VI are better than Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, I would. I mean, because I think that that's actually a really good analogy to make. Is look at how pixel art grew, and aside from like the fact that they were the first, does any game from the Atari just like stand out as like classically this game still looks great?
Oh, in the 2600?
Yeah.
I was thinking about this and I was scrubbing my brain cells and I cannot think of a single game that looks good. I mean, everything I've looked at from that era, it just makes my eyes bleed.
I think the only game I can objectively look at as like being a hallmark of putting in great aesthetic within the limitations of the system for the Atari 2600 is Pitfall.
Yeah, that was the one that was the closest I got, but that's because but I was thinking it's not just the graphics there, it's the graphics integrated with the gameplay that really makes that game stand out.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at also, but then you move into the 8-bit era and look how iconic Mario's original sprite is.
Uh-oh, we're going to pull out the 3D model.
I mean, this is iconic. Like, it's amazing, and how well like Mario really still holds up to this day. And I think when you got into even the 16-bit era, I think just the way that the depth of that art improved because you got more colors and you could have different levels of layering. Again, it's aesthetic dealing with the limitation system. Why does Mario have a mustache? Because they couldn't really get a nose and make a differentiator a mouth. And Donkey Kong, and that's the origin of Mario's mustache. It was a limitation of the system. They're like, well, how do we give his face definition? We'll give him a mustache.
So, like, what about Pac-Man? I mean, that's iconic. I think that those graphics hold up well, especially in the era of the casual puzzle game.
Oh, I would definitely say so. And I'm going to harp on this aesthetic thing a lot because to me, that's really what it's all about, is how you make something look good within that realm. Is like, here are the limitations. And so back to the Atari 2600, if you look back at like a lot of like N64 or PS1 or Sega Saturn games, man, they look like ass.
Oh, it's terrible. Terrible.
And to put it bluntly, that is the Atari 2600 era of 3D models. And then you went into the PS2 and suddenly you could have you could have higher poly counts and you could have higher textures. Sure, they're still a little flat. The lighting's a little lackluster, but that's the 8-bit era. And then you move on to the PS3 and then you're suddenly looking at like, that's the 16-bit era. There was a marked improvement 1-to-1 and then of others. And I feel that one of the biggest traps to fall into when you're doing graphics versus aesthetics that I think a lot of developers these days, like now that you can have graphical fidelity out the wazoo, is I think when you aim for realism or some modicum thereof is when you start to fall into a trap of you're dating yourself, because that fidelity is always going to improve. But if you make something cartoony, like Wind Waker, it doesn't really age because it has no reason to. You have nothing to compare it against except itself. Could the models be high resolution? Yes. Could the lighting be better? Yes. But all in all, the game still looks amazing.
What about Heavy Rain? I mean, there's one that I think is not aging well, yet at the time it was, supposedly photo perfect or photorealistic, I guess.
I haven't played Heavy Rain and I don't know about it to make a comment about it. Right. But so I think when you look at those kind of things, like what were you able to accomplish in that space and how you move things forward. Yeah, I think photorealism it's a great goal to strive for, but there's always going to be that slight level of uncanny valley where you're just like, well, that's not quite right. But when you have things like, hate to keep going back to Nintendo, you've got Mario games, or you've got even Super Meat Boy, I think, is a good example of a game that will probably age well because of its aesthetic. It's locked, and you have nothing else to compare it against. And you're like, well, I can see where things could have been better, but I think that when you force those limitations and you understand how not to push something too far, I think that's when you really have games that age well.
I think for older games, 20, 25 years ago, if you look at publishers in general, like Capcom, I think had a really strong, whether we're talking, Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, Mega Man, I think that those have aged well. If you look at Konami with their platforming work with like Castlevania, for example, I think those age really well. To kind of go into the PC realm, even before that was King's Quest. Mm-hmm. And I thought King's Quest, I feel like those graphics have aged well. Probably not the gameplay, but certainly the graphics.
Yeah. And I think when you have graphics and aesthetic, and they are made to serve the environment, serve the game, and you do them right, then I think that's when you really have something special. And I think that's what kind of makes games age well.
Yeah, and as far as games today that I think are going to age well, I tend to think that the cutting edge games with the best graphics and pulling the best polygons and all that stuff, I don't think they'll necessarily age well. To me, what I think is going to age well is like you mentioned, Super Meat Boy. I think Fez is going to age well. I do think Borderlands will age well, and that's got kind of a heavy, cell shaded sort of look to it.
It's very stylized.
It's stylized. It's distinctive. And I think that games not yet out. So this is really me kind of spitballing here, but like No Man's Sky, is a game that looks distinct. Oh my God, Mario's trying to jump away. All he knows how to do. So I think No Man's Sky is an example of it's stylized, but I think it may create a very memorable experience. Yeah,
and I think even if there are games, I think even if you have a certain level of photorealism, there's enough that it's stylized enough where you can say that it's going to age somewhat well. And I think like the Arkham games are probably a good example of that.
Oh, yeah, but they also tap into the comic.
Exactly. There's a different aesthetic to it, and that's what they brought to the table. It's like, there's realism, there's high-level textures and lighting and effects and all these awesome things that sell the atmosphere, but it's the atmosphere of the game, and the graphics serve that purpose.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I mean, this is something I just keep going on and on.
This is a rabbit hole that I'm sure we could go on forever, but unfortunately, we have gameplay to record.
Oh, okay.
So thank you, Nathan, for that wonderful question. That is a great question.
Thank you, eh?
He's not actually Canadian.
Good day, and welcome to the show.
Anyway, we want to hear your thoughts on the matter. What games do you think have aged well? What games do you think look like a buttload of ass? Let us know in comments or on our Twitter or however you would like to get in touch with us. And if you have a question of your own, you can also, not only can you tell us in comments or on Twitter like we used to, you can now go to GameGrazers.com/discuss. What? And submit your own question there. Lots of other cool goodies there. And if you like what we got going on here at Game Grazers, like videos, share them on your favorite of social medias, and if even inclined, please tickle that subscribe button. Thank you, Andy.
I want to tickle that subscribe button.
No.
Thank you, Davis. Bye.